Picture yourself standing in the heart of Rome during the year 400 AD. Towering marble columns stretch toward the heavens around you. Massive aqueducts carry crystal clear water across endless horizons. The legendary Colosseum rises before you, capable of holding 50,000 roaring spectators. You're positioned at the very center of what many considered the greatest empire humanity had ever witnessed. This vast dominion stretched across 3 entire continents. It had endured for nearly a millennium. If you had approached any Roman citizen in that moment and suggested that within just 76 years, their magnificent city would become nothing more than empty ruins, and their mighty empire would completely vanish from existence, they would have dismissed you as completely insane. To them, Rome represented permanence itself. Rome embodied invincibility. Their systems seemed far too massive and established to ever collapse. Now, transport yourself to present-day Times Square in New York City. Observe those gleaming skyscrapers piercing the sky. Watch the electronic displays flashing record-breaking market numbers. Consider the military might that controls every major ocean across the globe. If I suggested to you that by 2026, the very foundations supporting this American empire would suffer irreparable damage, your reaction would likely mirror that ancient Roman citizen's response. You would probably insist that America has grown too powerful to fail. However, history doesn't consist of random, disconnected events. Instead, it functions as a detailed blueprint. It represents a recurring pattern of ascent and decline, driven by the unchanging nature of human behavior. We aren't exceptional. We're simply the most recent performers in an ancient drama, and currently we find ourselves in the climactic final scenes. The most disturbing aspect about Rome's collapse isn't merely that it occurred. What's truly chilling is how remarkably similar it appears to our current situation. These parallels aren't vague or abstract. They're precise, measurable, and completely undeniable. Rome didn't crumble overnight. Instead, it slowly succumbed to a particular type of poison. A specific economic error gradually consumed its essence until the empire became too weakened to survive. Today, America has consumed that identical poison. We're displaying exactly the same symptoms. According to historical patterns of empire life cycles, we're rapidly approaching our own expiration date. The year 2026 isn't chosen arbitrarily. It represents the 250th anniversary of American independence. 250 years happens to be the historical average lifespan for global superpowers before they experience catastrophic transformation. Throughout this exploration, we won't simply examine dusty academic texts. We're going to hold up a mirror to examine our own civilization. We'll identify that singular fatal mistake that destroyed Rome and demonstrate how America is not only repeating it, but executing it with greater speed and on an unprecedented scale. To comprehend the ending, we must first understand the beginning. Rome wasn't always corrupt. During its early Republican period, it was built upon what historians call stoic virtues. Hardworking farmers would become soldiers when necessary to defend their lands, then return to agricultural life. A profound sense of duty, frugality, and shared destiny permeated their society. Economically, this philosophy was reflected in their monetary system. For centuries, Romans used the silver denarius as their primary currency. This coin contained almost pure silver. It represented sound money with genuine intrinsic value. If you possessed a denarius, you held something of real worth. You didn't need to trust government promises. You only needed to trust the precious metal in your hand. This sound monetary foundation created remarkable stability. It encouraged saving rather than reckless spending. It enabled long-term planning and investment. It funded those famous roads, magnificent aqueducts, and powerful legions that conquered the known world. Because their money was real, their economy operated on solid principles. But success can become a dangerous intoxicant. As Rome conquered additional territory, enormous wealth poured into the capital. The ruling class gradually transformed from warrior farmers into wealthy aristocrats. Their focus shifted from productive activities to excessive consumption. By the time the Republic died and the Roman Empire began under Augustus Caesar, the seeds of decay had already been planted. The empire became vast, extending from Britain to Egypt. Maintaining this enormous expanse proved incredibly expensive. They needed to pay hundreds of thousands of soldiers stationed thousands of miles from home. They had to construct and maintain infrastructure spanning continents. Most critically, they needed to keep Rome's population content. This is where the famous concept of bread and circuses originated. To prevent the massive unemployed population from rioting, emperors provided free grain distributions and spectacular gladiatorial entertainment. This represented the ancient equivalent of welfare programs, combined with endless entertainment distractions. All of this required enormous financial resources. The gold and silver looted from conquered territories eventually began drying up. Empire expenses started exceeding income. Rome faced a budget deficit. When confronted with this deficit, an emperor had 2 basic choices. The first option was politically difficult: They could reduce spending, which would anger citizens, or raise taxes, which would infuriate wealthy, powerful people. No emperor wanted to pursue these unpopular paths. They desired to be loved and glorified. So they chose what seemed like the easy solution. They chose the fatal mistake. They decided to manipulate their monetary system. This is the mechanism of collapse. Pay careful attention, because this is precisely where America stands today. The process began gradually. Around 64 AD, Emperor Nero faced a serious financial crisis. He needed additional money to pay debts and fund his extravagant lifestyle. He devised a clever but destructive scheme. He collected silver denarius coins, melted them down, and mixed in small amounts of cheaper base metals like copper. Then he reminted the coins. Suddenly, Nero possessed more coins to spend. The new denarius appeared identical to the old version on the surface. It displayed the emperor's image. It was officially declared to have the same value. But in reality, it contained less silver. It had reduced intrinsic worth. This was the ancient version of money printing. Nero had debased the currency. Initially, nobody noticed the difference. The party continued. But subsequent emperors observed how simple this technique was. If they needed to fund military campaigns, they just added more copper to the silver mixture. If they wanted to build new palaces, they simply debased the currency slightly more. Over the following 2 centuries, this process accelerated dramatically. By Emperor Marcus Aurelius's time, around 170 AD, the denarius contained only about 75% silver. 50 years later, it had dropped to 50% silver. By 270 AD, under Emperor Aurelian, the denarius had become worthless. It contained barely 5% silver. It was essentially a bronze coin with a thin silver coating that wore off after minimal use. The Roman government had effectively stolen their people's wealth gradually over 2 centuries. But economics has immutable laws. You cannot deceive reality indefinitely. The empire's people eventually realized what was happening. Merchants, traders, and soldiers understood they were receiving worthless coins. They knew the government was lying about the money's value. The result was catastrophic inflation. Because the money had less value, merchants demanded more of it for identical goods. Prices for wheat, oil, and clothing skyrocketed beyond belief. Historical records show that in the 2nd century, a specific measure of wheat cost approximately 8 denarii. By the 3rd century, that same measure cost 120,000 denarii. Savings were completely destroyed. If you had saved genuine silver coins throughout your entire life, the government's new worthless coins made your nest egg meaningless. The middle class evaporated. To combat this crisis, emperors attempted even more desperate measures. Emperor Diocletian issued the Edict on maximum prices in 301 AD. He essentially made price increases illegal under penalty of death. This policy failed miserably. Merchants simply stopped selling goods or moved their activities to black markets. Shortages spread throughout the empire. People starved in the streets because the economic system had completely collapsed. Soldiers on the frontiers, realizing they were being compensated with worthless metal, began abandoning their posts. They cared more about personal survival than defending a capital city that was robbing them. This is the crucial point. The barbarian tribes didn't break through Rome's defenses because they had suddenly become stronger. They succeeded because Rome had become significantly weaker. The financial decay had destroyed the social contract that held everything together. Why fight for an empire that pays you with fake money? Why produce goods for a system that punishes savers and rewards debasement? When money dies, trust dies. When trust dies, the empire dies. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, not with dramatic conquest, but with relative ease. They walked into what had become a hollow shell of formerly great civilization. Before moving forward, if this video made you stop and think, then the conversation doesn't end here. Leave a comment below and tell me what topic you want us to go deeper into next. This channel exists to break down what most people are never told, and your questions shape what comes next. If you want to understand these shifts before they become obvious to everyone else, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because what's coming won't be explained on the evening news, but it will be explained here. Now let's turn that historical mirror toward ourselves. Let's examine the United States of America with the same critical lens. Just like Rome, America began with currency backed by hard assets. The US dollar was, for a considerable time, essentially a receipt for gold. It represented a promise that the government could not simply print its way out of financial difficulties. This monetary discipline helped build the greatest industrial engine in human history. Just like Rome, America became the undisputed global superpower following a massive global conflict, World War II. We became the world's police force. We established military bases in distant corners of the globe. We became incredibly wealthy, shifting from a nation of hard-working producers to a nation of high-consuming debtors. Just like Rome, we eventually reached a point where our ambitions exceeded our financial capacity. We wanted both massive military spending to maintain our global empire and extensive social welfare programs domestically. Starting in the 1960s, economic pressure began mounting. We were simultaneously fighting the Vietnam War and launching Great Society programs. Gold was draining from the U.S. Treasury as foreign nations demanded payment in real assets. So, in 1971, President Richard Nixon did exactly what Emperor Nero had done 2,000 years earlier. He closed the gold window. He declared that the U.S. dollar was no longer convertible into gold. In that moment, the U.S. dollar stopped being a receipt for reality and became a fiat currency. Its value became based entirely on faith in the United States government. We switched from the silver denarius to the copper coin, metaphorically speaking. Since 1971, the debasement of the US dollar has been relentless. But unlike Rome, which was limited by how quickly they could physically melt down and remint metal coins, we face no physical limitations. We can create trillions of dollars with simple keystrokes on Federal Reserve computers. This allows us to accelerate the collapse process dramatically. What took Rome 2 centuries, we're accomplishing in 50 years. Consider the national debt. It took the United States over 2 centuries to accumulate its first $1 trillion in debt. Today we add a new $1 trillion to our debt every few months. We're now over $38 trillion in debt. This number is so astronomically large that the human brain struggles to comprehend it. How are we paying these bills? We're printing the money. The Federal Reserve creates new dollars from nothing to purchase government debt. This is exactly the same mechanism as adding base metals to silver coins. Every new dollar printed dilutes the purchasing power of every dollar you worked hard to save. We're already seeing the cracks forming. We're already experiencing inflation. You feel it every time you visit the grocery store. You see it when you examine housing prices that have become completely disconnected from economic reality. The government attempts to convince you that inflation remains low, just like Roman emperors claimed their copper coins were silver. But your bank account reveals the truth. We're witnessing the breakdown of social contracts. Just like late-stage Rome, America faces intense internal division. The gap between the super wealthy, who benefit from money printing, and the working class is wider than at any point since the Gilded Age. We're seeing the rise of bread and circuses in modern form. We're distracted by endless entertainment cycles, social media addiction, and celebrity obsessions, while the foundations of our economic system are being devoured by metaphorical termites. We have a population heavily dependent on government assistance, creating a political feedback loop that makes reducing spending essentially political suicide. Politicians who suggest cutting programs face electoral extinction. Now let's examine the timeline. Sir John Glubb, a British historian, analyzed the life cycles of great empires over 3,000 years of history. He discovered a startling pattern. The Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Roman Republic, Ottoman Empire, and British Empire all lasted for an average of approximately 250 years. They progressed through identical stages: the age of pioneers, the age of conquest, the age of commerce, the age of affluence, the age of intellect, and finally, the age of decadence and decline. The age of decadence is characterized by massive debt, currency debasement, military overextension, internal social division, and weakening of the shared values that originally built the empire. Does this sound familiar? The United States declared independence in 1776. If you add 250 years to that date, you arrive precisely at 2026. We are mathematically at the end of the historical average lifespan for a superpower. We have checked every single box on the empire collapse symptom list. We have the massive debt. We have currency debasement. We have military overextension. We have internal social division. Rome's final mistake was believing that economic laws didn't apply to them because they were Rome. They thought they could cheat the system by degrading their currency, and that the rest of the world would accept it indefinitely. America's final mistake is exactly identical. We believe that because the US dollar serves as the world's reserve currency, we can print infinite amounts without consequences. We believe we can borrow more money than has ever existed in human history and never repay it in real terms. But the rest of the world is awakening. Just like merchants in ancient Rome began refusing debased denarii, we observe nations worldwide, from China to Russia to Saudi Arabia, actively taking steps to move away from the US dollar in global trade. These represent the modern barbarians at the gate. They're not attacking with weapons. They're attacking by simply rejecting our debt. If the world stops accepting dollars for real goods like oil and manufactured products, all those trillions of printed dollars will flood back into the domestic US economy. The result won't just be the inflation we see today, it will be hyperinflation that destroys the middle class overnight. The year 2026 isn't a doomsday prediction where civilization ends on a specific Tuesday. It's a historical marker. It's the point where the mathematical weight of our debt and currency debasement becomes unsustainable. It's the point where interest payments on our national debt become larger than our entire defense budget. It's the point of no return. When Rome fell, it wasn't the end of the world. Humanity survived. Italy survived. But the structure of that society, the comfort, security, and global dominance vanished into what we call the Dark Ages. Those who were dependent on the system were crushed when the system failed. Those who survived and even thrived during Rome's collapse were individuals who saw it coming. They were people who held real assets like land, gold, silver, and productive skills instead of relying on the debased currency of a dying state. The warning signs are flashing red. History is screaming at us across the centuries. The mistake has already been made. The poison is already in our system. The only question remaining is how long the patient has left and what you are going to do to prepare for the inevitable reset. We cannot stop the cycle of empire. It's bigger than any individual. It's bigger than any politician. But we can learn from it. We can refuse to be like that Roman citizen standing in the Colosseum believing the party will last forever. We can open our eyes and see the ruins before they fully materialize. The clock is ticking toward 2026. The final act has begun. Those who understand history have a tremendous advantage. Those who ignore it are doomed to repeat it. The question isn't whether this cycle will continue. It's whether you'll be prepared when it does. This is just one piece of the bigger picture. Subscribe if you want to understand the full context and how to better protect yourself in uncertain times. And the video on screen takes this story one step further.